Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast, where everyone belongs, especially if you think you don't. Welcome, imposters. My name is Chris Grundeman, and I'm here with my co-host, the absolutely amazing Zoe Rose.
Hey.
Hey. This is the Daniil Baturin episode, and you're going to be super into it. Daniil is an enterprise and telecom network generalist, an open source software maintainer, a proponent of functional programming and strong type systems, as well as an occasional technical writer, and a player of the clarinet. Hi, Daniil. Would you like to introduce yourself a bit further to the Imposter Syndrome Network?
Hi, Chris and Zoe. You read my description from LinkedIn, I think, and it's more or less exhaustive. Well, I also write music and sing medieval music sometimes, as well as playing the clarinet.
Excellent. We've obviously got a lot of ground to cover today, as I'm actually really interested in the intersection of networking and open source software, especially in light of today's growth in bare metal and virtual network devices. But before we get into that, I'd like to start today back near the beginning and understand, why you got into technology at all. Is this something that came from a young age, or maybe later in your life? Was it something that was intentional or accidental? Anyway, maybe you can tell us why technology.
So I've been always interested in hard sciences, though not only. And as a child, I was interested in all kinds of things about how the world works and how different things in the world work. And I had a few strong interests. My biggest interest in school was chemistry. And I actually participated in quite a few conferences for high school students and science Olympiads and won quite a few of them. But then I shifted my focus to programming and computer science, not least because where I lived, there weren't really many opportunities for doing great research in chemistry. There's a joke about the university committee deciding whom to fund. Chemists and physicists all want expensive equipment, then mathematicians only want pencils and erasers, and then they decide that we need to fund philosophers because they only need pencils and no erasers. And it's very true. If you are in a relatively remote and small location, and it's not a realistic opportunity to move very far away, 1,000 miles away, to get into college for you, then your opportunities to do great research, something like chemistry or physics, are going to be quite limited. But computer science and programming are so great because you only need a computer and your mind and some papers for scrolling algorithm ideas on. You can do it from anywhere, no matter how well funded your place is.
I love it. Yeah, you just need the computer.
Yeah. Actually, my family was very poor, and my first computer was assembled from parts that all their friends donated to me. It was about 2002 or 2003, and it was an Intel 486 with about 8 megabytes of RAM initially.
Hey, starting out, that's really all you need is to get into it. It's more when you actually have stuff to do that you need a little bit more power, or at least that's how I felt.
Oh, well, it's funny that a lot of people assume that I'm much older than I am because I started with outdated equipment and had to master the art of assembly and maintenance. So, because it was old and I had to look for parts in various dollar stores, so to speak, and make do with what I could find.
That probably taught you a lot as well.
Yeah.
Starting the hard way, I suppose, but it taught you, I imagine. I'm one of those people that are hands-on. I tend to learn a little bit more effectively. I'm curious, because you had to do a lot more of the, self-learning or kind of building as you go, is that kind of what directed you into starting your career in tech? Obviously, you had just said that you were searching for opportunities from a small area, but I imagine there's also other opportunities out there. So did that kind of help direct you, or was it you already were pursuing that and it just added to it, I suppose?
I suppose it did. My first job that I got was assistant administrator in a very small university department. And my friend studied there just referred me to them because he knew that I knew a lot about Linux and about maintaining not very up-to-date computers. So he knew I was up for the job, and he suggested me to them, and they took me, and that's how I started.
That's a fair point, because universities don't tend to always have the most, or schools in general, don't tend to have the most up-to-date equipment. That's actually how I got a job as well. So it's always good to, have the more historic knowledge, we'll say. Currently, you're a co-founder and lead architect at VyOS. What's that like? What's your day-to-day kind of like?
Well, since the company isn't all that large, and it's also all entirely open source, it may be quite unusual in that a lot of the time my interaction with people from my own company and people from the community is largely the same. And actually, a lot of the time we had community members present in our internal development meetings. Because sometimes there are people who contribute as much as people who are actually our employees. And in fact, quite a few of our employees, they are from the community. So sometimes the lines between my work on open source and my work at my own company are kind of blurred.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Does that mean that part of the work is kind of maintaining or sustaining that community? Or do you really just kind of work alongside them and there's other folks who are really pushing the community forward?
Well, I'm also a part of the community.
Very good point.
So, when we started, VyOS wasn't a company initially. So the story was that there was a project named Vyatta, VyAtta, which ostensibly means open in Sanskrit, but I have never verified that claim. It was a startup in California, venture funded, and the product was good, but a lot of management decisions in the long run made it run out of funding, and it underwent a sale to Brocade, and Brocade a lot of time is unfortunately a company where projects go to die. I don't really like to badmouth any companies, but a lot of products that Brocade purchased went in pretty bad directions.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair.
And with Vyatta, it mainly just died. But in fact, so I was first a user of Vyatta when it was still a startup. Then, from my participation in the community, they knew that I knew it well, and they actually invited me to work on it as a contractor. I started before I worked there, and since I loved that product, and I knew a lot of people from the community who loved it, and they wanted it to be available as an open source project and not some proprietary closed down stuff. And they also wanted it to stay alive. And since I had the knowledge required to start a fork and decouple it from the original infrastructure, then I became a maintainer just because I wanted it most and I knew what to do. And then I've been maintaining it for a while, and then with some friends from the community, we started a company.
Very cool. So you were a user of the Vyatta software first, kind of on the networking side, it sounds like. And then you got pulled in and you actually worked for... Did you work for Vyatta, the company, or were you working for Brocade after the purchase?
Well, first for Vyatta, then briefly for Brocade.
You were there during the transition, okay. And then once it kind of petered out at Brocade, you stepped in to become a maintainer of the open source version.
Yeah, so I resigned from Brocade, took the last public version of the source code and started from there.
Very cool. That's awesome. I really like that story. I think it's really neat to see this, right, where there was this product that, maybe the company running it had some issues, but the product itself was beloved by the community, and to see the community kind of come up and grab it and continue maintaining it and building it. And I think VyOS is probably now deployed farther and wider than Vyatta ever was, I think.
It might be a lot of the time, since it's all open source and we intentionally don't include any mandatory telemetry or anything, it's hard to estimate how many users we have exactly.
No, that's a fair point. Although it's a really good kind of a reoccurring theme on our episodes comes back to community and how important community is for people's careers. So it's interesting to see kind of a different perspective. It's not only been very important for your career, but literally for the job that you currently do, it's been a whole part of continuing on that software. So that's actually really interesting. I like that. One thought I had is, I know you previously were a DevOps engineer. I imagine that means you did development. And day to day, how much would you say that as a co-founder and lead architect, your development background has been a huge benefit to your experience? Or is it something they're slightly different careers?
Well, since I never stopped writing code, like if you go to GitHub and look at commit history, there's still a lot of me. Thankfully, there are lots of people other than me. Like at first, it was basically just me and a few people from the community, and now we are very close to our thousands pull requests in the documentation repository alone, and in the main code bases, there are 30 pull requests short of 2,000.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I see that. So I guess maybe what's also interesting is going back a little bit further. And as you said, right, you kind of started as a system administrator. I know you had a few jobs in system administration and then kind of moved, I think we moved from there into that DevOps job and then ended up being a developer at Viata. And I'm interested, was coding kind of always a part of that? Like, were you doing some little scripting and automation as a system administrator, or was that actually a shift from kind of running more general IT systems?
Of course it was. I also did quite some freelance web development at different points. Here's a very funny story. So one of the first jobs I had was during the Great Recession, and the company, a furniture retail chain, during recessions, furniture is one of the first things where sales drop, and that company was deep in trouble, and it actually didn't have money to pay its own employees. So I was responding to calls from users at the company as a sysadmin, and also writing websites for third-party clients to actually make some money before the main company wasn't paying me. I was paying with months or 2 months delays.
Wow. It sounds like a lot of your career has been surrounding just being able to survive, essentially. Originally, you were a chemical engineer, or at least I believe you did that at university, and then you moved to system administration.
I dropped out of the university. I plan to go back, so the reason, I'll admit it openly, was a pretty bad depressive episode. Mental health issues are no joke. And sadly, I never really had an opportunity to go back there with a need for a full-time job to support myself.
No, I understand that completely.
I became a second-time student of classical music much later, but it's a different story.
Fair enough. I also am a university dropout. I was studying botany. That did not succeed because I am allergic to plants. So
that's wild.
I can relate. Not the same exactly, but I remember when I dropped out, it was quite hard because I felt like an absolute failure. I just spent so much money on university and then dropped out. How did you get through that?
Well, a lot of the time, if you wait long enough, depressive episodes just go away. But yeah, well, I'd say to everyone that if it's really bad, people really need to contact mental health professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good advice.
There are cases that you cannot wait out, although there are also cases that are. And since those issues are usually lifelong, I would also argue that people also need to learn to cope with it and need to maintain a healthy lifestyle. I find that exercise actually helps my mental health a lot. If I don't have opportunities to exercise, I actually start feeling much worse, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, I find the same thing. I've become a fairly regular runner anyway, because I definitely notice a fairly drastic difference in my mood and my attitude and my ability to work, especially longer hours and be friendly with people while I'm doing it, if I get up and get some exercise in the morning. Do you have a routine around exercise, or is it just something you do as much as you can?
I guess as much as I can. Sometimes there are better opportunities, if I have more time, I can go for a much longer run. If I don't, I just make a quick route, run around the university campus here nearby, then go get groceries, or go for a coffee or something.
Yeah, and I think that's, something that, especially here in the US, walking in most cities is not highly normal or even easy to do. There's some really big suburban sprawl and things like that. So I would reiterate that I know when I moved away from New York City and came kind of back to more of middle America and suburban America, I didn't notice it at first, but I realized fairly quickly that I was getting much less exercise because in New York, I had been walking everywhere. I mean, you would take the train in between, but almost everything was walking. And then, when I moved here, there was almost no walking. So not even to go get the groceries. And especially working from home, it can be, days where I don't even get up and leave the house. So remembering to go exercise, I think, is super important, especially depending on your environment, because a lot of us don't necessarily live in places where even normal activities like going to get some bread is not a. It's some places it's great, right? Like in a lot of European cities, that's there's more local marketplaces in some of the bigger cities in the U.S. and other places as well. There's more of that kind of neighborhood vibe, and you can kind of walk around and pick things up. But yeah, if you're not getting even just a walk in the day, it can be really hard on your, at least for me, on kind of your emotions and.
Yeah, I greatly enjoy this area. It's Cork in Ireland. You can even walk to nearby towns from the Cork proper.
I was also going to say it's Ireland, so it's quite beautiful. I lived there before where I currently live, so that also helps. And, in the area, people tend to be quite friendly.
Yeah, that's nice. And then, so more recently, as you mentioned, you went back to university, I think, around the clarinet performance and your music writing. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, one, I'm just interested, right, in kind of where that passion or hobby for the clarinet specifically came from. And then also...
Actually, I wanted to play clarinet as a kid, but I had no opportunities, not least because there was no way my family could afford a clarinet.
Fair enough.
And there were also no teachers in that area.
When did you go buy your first clarinet?
Well, so a funny story actually. When people contacted me about a tricky issue with VyOS, like they wanted a very tricky setup. They were a small hosting company and their network was kind of convoluted. And they wanted me to help them simplify it. And somehow there was some disagreement about the best way to send me a payment. And I asked that guy, he was running it mostly single-handedly. So can you order that clarinet and send it to my address?
I love it.
It was easier to arrange that payment to sending me actual money.
That's really interesting. We had one guest a while back that his career is, what was it? He wanted to be in a band, and so, but he couldn't pursue that. So he worked to make money to be able to afford the instruments. So it sounds very similar. Well, not the same, but your true passion, it sounds like, is music, and your career has been, you're doing it to survive, to build a career, to build the foundation, but then you celebrate that with music.
Well, for me, I'm actually passionate about many things.
Fair.
So I do a lot of programming that no one pays me for, just because I like to solve my own problems and also solve problems for other people.
Yeah, I think anybody I know that works in open source software, that's quite common, is also being part of the community, the bigger community, and providing support as well as, content, even when it's not necessarily financially funded.
Well, I would say I'm very grateful to everyone who makes free and open source software, because it's only the work of those people that is often poorly funded or not funded at all that I can throw quick prototypes together. If I were to write all that from scratch, it would take years to get anywhere.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think it was Isaac Newton who said, if I have seen further than other men, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And I think that definitely plays out in open source software.
Yeah, it's often attributed to Newton, but yeah, man, it's true in any case, no matter who says it.
Yeah, whoever said it. And it definitely applies in software, right? Where, to your point, right, there's a lot of projects that couldn't exist if they weren't building on previous work.
Yeah, exactly.
You've had a pretty lengthy career, I believe, because you said you started as system administrator in 2007, which is quite a while ago. Over the years, I imagine you've had some lessons learned, you've had mistakes, you've had achievements. I have two parts to my question. One is, what's not the biggest necessarily, but the achievement you're most proud of? And second is, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice when you were starting, what would it be?
Well, so I guess the biggest achievement is quite easy to make. When I started VyOS, a lot of startups create a lot of technical debt in their code base. Because if you need to crank out feature fast, you need to cut corners. And a lot of the time, those design decisions you make in the early stage to cut corners, the technical debt is not just suboptimal code, it's also suboptimal design that is very difficult to change. And one of the biggest challenges with VyOS was to get rid of that luggage of those both coding and architecture problems. But now, the design that I came up with and that we were methodically implementing, it actually proved scalable enough. and it made a lot easier for people to contribute. Like there were some areas, there were basically no touch for anyone except staff engineers at Vietta. And I was delighted when using my new framework for that component. Specifically, it's automatic conversion of old configuration syntax to new if you make incompatible changes. So one distinguishing feature of Vietta was that you can make changes to the configuration file syntax, and they can be automatically migrated to a new version. But the API for it was so horrible that it was black magic to write anything. And using my new approach, people from the community started contributing new migration scripts, and I was delighted to see that it not only works, it actually makes it easier for the community to contribute.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love that, right? I mean, and that ability to kind of avoid technical debt by allowing things to be upgraded, absolutely huge. Yeah.
One difficult was that, well, it's now going to sound a little self-congratulatory, I guess. I admit that I guess I was as lucky as I was smart with the design decisions. But still, in the early stages, quite a few people, even from the community, didn't believe that it was the right thing to do. And people were insisting that we need to keep up writing in the existing style because at least it was proven to work. And my ideas sounded pretty radical at the time, at least. So sometimes, if you're really convinced that something is a right idea, you need to keep at it even if people say otherwise. And it's actually hard and lonely to do the heavy lifting yourself before people can see that it was actually a right idea.
I could definitely relate to that. Sometimes people don't see what you see. And so it is really hard to kind of continuously pursue that, even when you don't have necessarily all the support you're hoping for. The second part of my question was, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself? Is that the advice, or is there other advice that you think you would have benefited from earlier in your career?
Well, it's a good question, not least because I think my career path no longer exists. A lot of small companies and small departments just don't have that kind of sysadmins anymore to begin with. Because modern computers, you don't need so many people maintaining them a lot of the time. They aren't even repairable in the first place. It's a bad thing, of course. I wish they were easily repairable. But a lot of laptops, for example, even come with memory soldier to the board. There's nothing you can do if it breaks. Good question, really.
So what do you think you would do now if you were starting? I mean, I know it's a hard question to answer, but just hypothetically, without those opportunities, I mean, do you think you'd find another way into tech today, or do you see a path for new folks who are just starting out and kind of coming from humble beginnings and wanting to get into technology?
Well, for new folks, there are, of course, a new path now. Like, there are still a lot of people who need, even if you are exclusively using a cloud platform like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, you still need people who can administer VMs, even though you don't need people installing Linux by hand. But I can see how for people it can be harder to start out because entry-level positions often require skills that are hard to acquire other than on the job. Because universities don't really teach you the day-to-day stuff of DevOps engineers, for example.
That's very fair. Yeah. And I think it's twofold, right? I think that practical experience is sometimes hard to get because if the job requires practical experience, but the practical experience requires the job, you're stuck in that catch-22, right? And so that's tough. I even saw not too long ago, and I forget who it was or what the programming language was, but there was, somebody had created a new tool and saw a job posting that required like 5 years of experience with that tool. And this particular gentleman who had written the tool wrote a post, I forget it was on Twitter or LinkedIn somewhere, and said, well, I guess I'm not qualified for this job because I only invented this tool like 4 years ago. So sometimes it's just these unrealistic expectations too, right? Which is hard.
Well, it's also that, I've read an article recently specifically about women in tech. Like that a lot of job offers are just written in a very unrealistic way. And a lot of women are less likely to apply if they don't check every point of the checklist. Even if all those points are simply impossible to check for anyone, like that guy who wrote the tool 5 years ago.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I saw a similar article. Yeah, I think there was a research study that recently came out that showed something like that. So, and it's not just women too. I think it's other minorities, other folks that are not represented in the community as well. often won't apply for jobs that they don't feel fully qualified for. Whereas I can be honest, right? The only reason my career has been what it is at all is because I've only applied for jobs I wasn't qualified for. So on the flip side.
Which is hilarious because I definitely fit in the earlier. I know there's been situations that have held me back because of my limited confidence or because, like you said, I didn't qualify for everything. And so I didn't apply.
As per usual, the timers are going off here. We'll have to wrap it up. We're out of time. Daniil, thank you again for coming on the show and sharing your story with the Imposter Syndrome Network. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you to all of our listeners for your most valuable time and attention. If you found this episode insightful or interesting, please take a moment to like, follow, and share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Pay it forward and let others know about this show and the great guests we have on. Now, Daniil, before we totally wrap up, I did want to ask you one more question. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about, is it Supalt? Is that how you say it? I know it's a French word and I'm terrible at pronouncing them, but it's your static website management tool I think you're kind of doing on the side right now.
Yes, it's a tool that takes completely different approach than Jekyll, Hugo, and friends. It can do all stuff that JavaScript can do on the client side, but it can save the result to a static page.
That sounds awesome. I am definitely plagued with JavaScript all the time, and getting away from it makes a ton of sense. So we'll put that link in the show notes along with a bunch of other stuff, all your socials and VyOS as well, VyOS. And we will be back next week.
Is there a topic you specifically want us to cover? An example is one of our guests, they had their own framework for imposter syndrome. So they wanted to cover that one, or I can't remember any other example, but yeah.
Well, I don't even know if I qualify to speak on imposter syndrome.
Perfect.
That is perfect. Yeah.
What do I even know about it to begin with?
That's all right.
Fair enough.